Why did the air feel heavier the moment she stepped off the transport? The Virginia humidity hit Elena Vasquez like a wall, thick and wet, sticking to her skin under the desert camouflage uniform. Sweat collected beneath her collar as she adjusted the strap of her worn duffel bag, taking in the sprawling stretch of Quantico that would be her world for the next 8 weeks. This wasn't just any course. This was the course, the Advanced Sniper Training Program, the most unforgiving marksmanship school in the U.S. military. 40 candidates had been selected from thousands: Delta Force operators, Army Rangers, Marine Scout snipers, Navy SEALs, the kind of warriors whose presence could change the air in a room. Every bootstep crunched against gravel as they moved toward the equipment staging area. Voices carrying the casual weight of classified missions and body counts civilians could never imagine. Elena knew their type instantly. Apex predators, each with a resume built on danger. The equipment table stretched across the tarmac like a showroom for gods of war. Rifles gleamed in the afternoon sun, each a precision masterpiece worth more than most people's cars, Barretts, Chaytaks. Accuracy internationals, weapons engineered for impossible distances. Operators handled them like relics in a cathedral, murmuring about modifications the way priests might discuss scripture. Elena found an empty space at the far end of the table, laying out her gear with quiet, deliberate precision. Cleaning kit, ammunition, a battered Pelican case. She opened it without ceremony, revealing her M40A6, the standard-issue Marine sniper rifle. It bore scars, scratches from Afghan rock, a barrel re-blued twice, a scope mount worn smooth from years of adjustment under fire. But it was spotless. Every inch was cared for. Whoa, what do we have here? The voice had that brand of arrogance Elena had heard too often in special operations circles. She looked up to see him, a mountain of a man with a sealed trident glinting on his chest. Jake Morrison, 6'4", built like he could bench press. A truck, hair perfect despite the humidity. 3 more SEALs flanked him like a pack. Their rifles? Works of art, carbon fiber stocks, titanium actions, scopes that could probably read license plates in another country. Morrison's own rifle was a custom, 338 Lapua Magnum, the kind of weapon that could reach the moon if the shooter was good enough. Did you buy that at a pawn shop, sweetheart? His voice was loud enough for every operator nearby to hear. His men erupted in sharp, barking laughter. Elena didn't answer. Her hands moved with the steady rhythm of ritual, lifting the M40A6 as if greeting an old friend. This rifle had been with her through 26 confirmed kills across 3 deployments. It had ended Taliban commanders in the mountains of Kunar, silenced IED makers in Helmand. I mean, seriously, Morrison went on, his voice swelling for the crowd. That thing belongs in a museum. More laughter. She attached her scope. One adjustment at a time. Not a wasted motion. She could feel all 40 pairs of eyes on her, waiting for her to crack. Morrison stepped closer, his shadow falling across her workspace. You know, this is the big leagues, right? Not some weekend warrior course where they hand out participation trophies. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes met his. Dark, steady, unblinking. My rifle works fine, she said, voice low and even. We'll see about yours. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Morrison's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Then she turned away from him, dismissing him as if he didn't exist, resuming her methodical checks. At 0430 the next morning, the alarm screamed through the barracks. 40 elite operators rolled from their bunks in unison, every movement precise. The first 2 days had been classroom drills, equipment checks and evaluations, and through it all, Morrison's pack had been relentless. Salt in her coffee, gear moved when she wasn't looking, conversations that stopped cold when she approached. But today was different. Today, they would shoot. The range stretched across 2 miles of Virginia countryside, targets set at distances that could humble even seasoned marksmen. Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez stood at the firing line, his expression carved from stone. "Gentlemen," his voice cracked like a whip. "And lady," a slight nod toward Elena. 800 yards, 10 rounds, prone position. Winds gusting 15 to 20 from the northwest. 30 minutes. Engage all targets. Elena lay prone. The earth cooled beneath her chest. Around her, men adjusted their scopes. Checked their wind drift with rangefinders that cost as much as a car. "Ladies first," Morrison called. False chivalry dripping from every syllable. She ignored him, breathing slow. Through the scope, the world shrank to a circle of glass. The silhouette wavered in the shimmer, but her crosshairs settled steady. She felt the wind on her cheek, counted the rhythm of the gusts. Heartbeat slowed. The trigger broke like glass. The rifle cracked, 800 yards away. The center ring bloomed with dust. A perfect hit. Murmurs rippled down the line. Her second shot, her third, each punched the same spot. By the eighth, the group was small enough to cover with a silver dollar. Silence fell over the range, except for the wind. Rodriguez's voice was tight over the radio. 10 rounds. 10 hits. Group measures 2.3 inches center to center. Best of the day. By a factor of 3, Morrison's turn. His first shot missed the target entirely. By the end, his grouping was more than a foot across. His men stayed silent. The shift in the air was palpable. No one laughed now. That night, the mess hall buzzed. Morrison's voice carried over the low hum. Nobody shoots like that with standard issue gear. Not on their first day. You know how a female Marine gets into this course. Not merit. His words landed like poison. Some nodded, others looked away. Elena kept her face neutral, pen moving across ballistic charts. Inside, a cold flame burned. The next morning, the kill house. Morrison was on her team. "Looks like we get to see if our diversity hire can handle real pressure." He sneered. Elena checked her rifle. "I'll take point," Morrison laughed. "Sweetheart, this isn't Afghanistan." They breached. Targets popped and vanished. Speakers screamed with simulated chaos. Morrison rushed ahead, loud and obvious. Elena moved like smoke, hitting threats he missed. A sniper in a second-story window. A child soldier hiding in shadow in the final corridor. His accidental shoulder check sent her tumbling downstairs. Pain flared through her wrist and shoulder. She got up slowly, tested her rifle, still functional. "This is just the beginning," Morrison whispered. "I'll make you quit." She met his eyes. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." That night, Captain Chun found her in the medical tent, watching the corpsman wrap her wrist. "That wasn't an accident," he said. "Prove it," she replied. "You could report him." She laughed without humor. "And say what? That the big bad SEAL hurt my feelings? So what are you going to do?" Her eyes burned steady. "Destroy him. Not with paperwork, with a rifle in my hands." Outside, the Virginia night hummed with distant gunfire and helicopters. Morrison had made it personal. She would make it legendary. What made the darkness feel heavier tonight? Week 4 had arrived, and with it, a cold that cut straight through uniforms and skin. The kind of cold that turned every movement into a test of will. Elena's wrist still ached, a dull reminder of Morrison's little accident in the kill house. But her mind was sharper than ever. The night operations phase was here, and this was where she thrived. The briefing room reeked of burnt coffee and fatigue. Master Chief Rodriguez stood before a massive topographical map of the training area. 15 square miles of dense forest, rolling hills, and abandoned structures. It looked like a living puzzle. "This week separates the snipers from the shooters," Rodriguez said, his voice steady but carrying weight. "Teams of 4. You'll hunt each other through terrain that will test everything you've learned. Night vision, thermal imaging, sound discipline. Complacency will get you killed." Elena's eyes scanned the map, seeing not just hills and trees, but firing lanes, choke points, escape routes. Afghanistan had taught her that landscapes have personalities, some friendly, some hostile. This one was perfect for someone like her. Morrison raised his hand. What about team assignments? Rodriguez checked his clipboard. Posted outside. You have 30 minutes to study terrain and plan your approach. First mission kicks off at 2200 hours. Outside, Elena found her name on the roster. Her stomach tightened. Team 4. Vasquez, Morrison, Jackson, Williams. She almost smiled. Rodriguez knew exactly what he was doing, putting two predators in the same cage. The equipment shed was alive with movement. Night vision goggles, thermal scopes, radios, the air smelled of gun oil and anticipation. Elena ran her hands over her M40A6, checking every part, feeling the familiar weight in her grip. Whoa, Morrison's voice came from behind. Looks like we're teammates again. Try not to fall down any stairs this time. She didn't look up. I'll try if you do. The first mission was a high-value target elimination in an abandoned warehouse complex 2 miles into the forest. When the exercise began, Morrison's plan unfolded exactly as she'd predicted. Loud, fast, aggressive, SEAL doctrine. Great for close-quarters assaults. Terrible for stealth sniping. They crashed through the underbrush, branches snapping under their boots. She didn't follow. One moment she was in their formation. The next she was gone, swallowed by the trees. The warehouse loomed in a moonlit clearing, its windows like dead eyes. Elena moved in a wide circle, taking 20 minutes to chart every angle, every shadow. She found her spot, a fallen tree 400 yards out with a clear line of sight to a second-story window. The target appeared at 2347, a cardboard silhouette, visible for 30 seconds. Her breathing slowed, the crosshairs settled. She squeezed. The suppressed rifle's whisper barely disturbed the night. Target down. The range officer's voice crackled. Mission complete. Time, 23 minutes, 47 seconds. Morrison's voice exploded on the radio. What? How? We didn't even see the target. She was already moving, fading back into the forest. At the rally point, she was leaning against a tree when the rest of her team stumbled in, breathing hard, faces flushed. How do you get there so fast? Morrison demanded. I moved like a sniper, she said evenly. You moved like a SEAL. Different missions, different methods. The second scenario was a moving convoy, a line of target vehicles snaking along a narrow forest road. Elena studied the route map, tracing her finger to a sharp curve along a steep hillside, a perfect choke point, while Morrison's team set up in the obvious overlook. She climbed 200 feet higher to a rocky outcrop no one else considered when the convoy came into view. Morrison's men opened fire, muzzle flashes lighting up the night, rounds chewing up empty road. They missed everything. Elena waited. The lead vehicle rounded the curve exactly where she'd predicted. One shot. The engine block detonated in a burst of steam and smoke. Second shot. The high-value target in the passenger seat slumped over. How the hell did she get up there? Morrison's voice carried through the trees, frustration cracking his words. By week's end, she wasn't just good. She was something else entirely. A phantom, she appeared in impossible positions, took shots that defied logic, eliminated entire teams without being seen. Instructors replayed footage of her low crawling through terrain others deemed impassable, disappearing into shadow, reappearing only to take the perfect shot. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair during one review, a rare smile tugging at his weathered face. Gentlemen, we're watching the birth of a legend. That final night of the phase, Elena sat in the barracks, breaking down her rifle for cleaning. Across the room, Morrison stared at her, and for the first time, there was something new in his eyes. Not anger, not arrogance, but a glint of fear. Rodriguez had read out her service record earlier that evening. The 26 confirmed kills. The longest confirmed kill by a female Marine sniper. 1,247 yards in Helmand Province. A Taliban commander. Now Morrison knew exactly who he'd been trying to humiliate. She could feel his gaze as she slid the bolt from the receiver, the motion smooth and practiced. He was beginning to understand something. In this game, he wasn't the predator. The real test was still coming, and when it did, she would make sure Morrison understood exactly what a cheap rifle, steady hands, and the right kind of patience could do. What did impossible really look like? The answer stood at the far edge of the range. So distant, it seemed more like a smudge against the tree line than a target. 2 miles away. 3,520 yards. The distance alone was enough to make even seasoned snipers shake their heads. Add a 30-mile-per-hour crosswind, gusting past 40, and it became something beyond challenging. It was absurd. The morning air bit at exposed skin, the wind cutting through uniforms like icy blades. The candidates, now down to 37 after weeks of attrition, gathered around a long-range table littered with weather readouts, ballistic charts, and satellite imagery of the range. The mood was quieter than usual, more respectful, almost reverent. Rodriguez didn't waste words. "Today," he said, "we see who belongs in the history books." His tone was flat, but there was a glint in his eyes, the kind that said he'd been waiting for this moment. "This shot," he continued, "has never been successfully made in the history of this course. Closest we've had is 18 inches off target. Today, your job is to put one round anywhere on a 4-foot by 4-foot silhouette at that distance. Anything less is a miss." A low murmur passed through the group. Elena said nothing. She stood at the back, hands in her pockets, feeling the wind buffet against her. She'd felt wind like this before, high in the mountains of Afghanistan, lying behind a rifle for hours, waiting for a target who might appear for only seconds. She could almost smell the dust of those ridges again. Morrison, of course, stepped forward. "Chief, with respect, what's the point of a shot that's physically impossible?" Rodriguez's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "If you think it's impossible, you don't understand the job. Real-world conditions aren't fair. You don't get to pick your engagements. You adapt, or people die." No one walked away. The firing line became a cathedral of metal and glass as the operators prepped their weapons. Barrett M107s, Chetak Intervention M200s, Accuracy Internationals with barrels so long they looked like they could harpoon whales. Price tags ranged from $10,000 to $50,000, each built for extreme precision. Morrison's rifle, of course, drew attention, a custom 338 Lapua Magnum from a legendary Montana gunsmith. Carbon fiber stock, titanium action, barrel tolerances so tight you could barely slide a human hair between them. Night Force, a TACR scope with more magnification than most spotting scopes. It wasn't just a rifle. It was a declaration of status. 50 grand, he said, loudly enough for the group. That's what a real shot costs. His eyes cut toward Elena's M40A6. Its worn stock and standard-issue scope, looking almost primitive by comparison. Not some mass-produced antique. She didn't look at him, didn't even blink, because she knew something he didn't. Something every seasoned combat sniper eventually learned. At extreme ranges, the weapon mattered. But the shooter mattered more. Physics didn't care how much your rifle cost. The first shooter, Captain Chun, was almost textbook. Flawless setup, perfect breathing. His 300 Win Mag round flew true, until the wind shoved it 2 feet wide. One by one, the elite took their turns. Delta Force veterans, scout snipers with city fight kills to their names, SEALs who could put 3 rounds into a quarter at 1,000 yards. Every single one missed. Then Morrison stepped to the line. He moved like a man born for this, confident, controlled. The wind snapped at the flags overhead, but he ignored them, eyes locked through the glass. His first shot was beautiful, perfect arc, Every spotter on the line tracked it in silence. For a moment, it looked like it might land, but then, impact, 18 inches low, 2 feet left, close, so close, but still a miss. His second shot drifted further. His third went high by the fifth. Frustration had stripped away his precision. His breathing was ragged, his movements jerky. Each miss was louder than the last. When the range officer called ceasefire, Morrison sat back hard, eyes dark. "That's impossible," he growled. Elena didn't answer. She stepped forward instead. The M40A6 felt like part of her body as she settled into prone. She closed her eyes, not to shut out the wind, but to listen to it. She let it move across her skin, feeling the rhythm of its gusts like a heartbeat. Afghanistan had taught her to read the wind like a living thing. Here, it had the same language. "This should be good," Morrison said, his voice tight. "Watch." Or embarrass herself, she ignored him, opened her eyes to the scope. The target shimmered like a mirage. She wasn't aiming at it. Her crosshairs sat 3 feet above and 2 feet left, an aim point that looked absurd to anyone without the math in their head. She breathed in, out, finger steady. The trigger broke clean. The rifle whispered its deadly message into the howling wind. The bullet began its 4-second journey. 2 miles, the halfway point passed. The wind shoved at it like a bully, gravity pulling harder with each yard. Coriolis drifted it slightly right. Every factor she'd calculated now played its hand. 3 seconds in, final drop. Rodriguez's voice was barely a breath. Impact in 3, 2, 1. The crackle of the radio came sharp and electric. Direct hit, center mass. Repeat. Direct hit. The line erupted. Shouts, laughter, disbelief. Men who'd been in combat zones, who'd seen miracles and horrors, now stood. Slack-jawed, Morrison stared at her, the disbelief in his eyes almost childlike. His world, the one where equipment and arrogance were the currency of dominance, had just collapsed. Elena didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just rolled onto her side, began breaking down her rifle with the same steady rhythm she'd used. Every day of the course, Rodriguez's boots crunched up beside her. "That," he said, voice low, "was the finest piece of shooting I've seen in 30 years. And the most important, because everyone here had just learned the truth. Rifles don't make legends. People do." What did silence sound like when 40 hardened operators were holding their breath? It was the space after her shot. The echo had long since rolled off the hills. The radio had delivered the confirmation. Direct hit, center mass, and yet no one moved. The wind still hissed across the range, snapping the flags overhead, but in the firing line, there was nothing, just stunned stillness. Elena kept her cheek pressed to the stock for a moment longer, eyes still on the target 2 miles away. She didn't need to look through the scope anymore. She knew. The shot had landed exactly where she'd seen it in her mind. Only when she slid the bolt back, ejecting the spent casing, did she rise from the rifle. No fist pump, no celebration. She just began her post-shot ritual, breaking the weapon down with the same deliberate care she used every day. To her, it wasn't a miracle. It was the result of years of practice, of learning to read the wind, like language, and let it carry her bullet instead of fighting it. Across from her, Morrison was frozen beside his $50,000 rifle, eyes locked on the distant target as if staring long enough might make the truth change. His jaw worked, but no words came. The man who had owned every room, every conversation, was suddenly small. Rodriguez stepped forward, boots grinding gravel. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, then at the target, then back at her again. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez," he said finally, his voice measured. "In 3 decades of training elite snipers, I've never seen anyone make that shot." She gave a single respectful nod and returned to her work. The applause started slow, hesitant, then spread, Not polite claps, but the solid, open palm sound of genuine respect. Even the ones who had joined in Morrison's taunts were on their feet now. Morrison's gaze burned into her back. She could feel it, hot and heavy, like the stare of a predator who suddenly realizes the roles have reversed. One of the Delta Force operators, Martinez, a man whose own confirmed kills were whispered about, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, his tone formal, "would you walk us through your wind calls? I've been shooting for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like that." Elena looked up at him. The same men who had laughed at her now stood in a half circle, waiting for her to speak. "Most shooters," she said simply, "try to fight the wind. I learned to dance with it." She gestured toward the flags that were still snapping overhead. "Wind isn't random. It has rhythm, personality. If you treat it like an enemy, it will beat you every time. If you work with it, it will carry your bullet home." Captain Chun, leaning on his spotting scope, frowned thoughtfully. "But the calculations, the drop, the drift, Coriolis. Math's just the start," she cut in. "You have to see the shot before you take it. You have to feel the bullet's path before you ever touch the trigger." She tapped her temple lightly. "That's where the real work happens." Behind her, Morrison finally found his voice. "Your rifle." His tone was strained, almost confused. "It's just standard issue. How can it outperform?" Elena's smile was small but sharp. "Because you forgot the most expensive component of any sniper system." She stood, shouldering the rifle with practiced ease. "The shooter, the words." Landed like a hammer. Morrison's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked around, saw the faces of the other operators, saw the truth in their eyes, and his own failure staring back at him. She could have let him hang there, could have cut him down with one more sentence. Instead, she did something that made even Rodriguez blink. She stepped toward him and extended her hand. "You're a good shooter," she said quietly. "Your technique's solid, but you've let your gear become a crutch. Gear doesn't make the sniper. The sniper makes the gear." The silence stretched. Morrison stared at her hand, pride and humiliation warring on his face. Finally, he reached out and shook it. His grip was firm, but his voice was barely above the wind. "I was wrong. About you. About what makes a sniper." She nodded once. "We all have things to learn." Rodriguez's voice carried over the line. "What you all witnessed today will be studied for years. Staff Sergeant Vasquez just set a new course record. First ever. Hit at this distance, but more than that. She's shown the most important quality of a sniper, the ability to perform under pressure and maintain professionalism in the face of adversity." The graduation ceremony that night was unlike any in the program's history. Elena stood at the front of the formation, her uniform worn, her rifle scarred, surrounded by men with pristine gear. When Rodriguez called her name for the course's top honor, the applause was deafening. Afterward, Morrison approached her. No swagger this time, no smirk. "Vasquez," he said, holding his rifle case almost awkwardly, "would you teach me about the wind calls, about seeing the shot?" She studied him, saw the shift. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar in his eyes. Humility. "Equipment doesn't make you a bad shooter," she said. "Arrogance does. If you're willing to listen, I'll teach you." That night, long after the others had gone, Elena stood alone on the range. The flags still snapped in the dark, but the wind no longer felt like an enemy. Her phone buzzed, a text from her father in Montana. "Heard through the grapevine you did something special today. Proud of you, kiddo." She typed back. "Just reminded some people legends aren't built from gear. They're forged from will." The target was still out there, 2 miles away, a dark square in the distance. A silent witness to the day a woman with a cheap rifle rewrote what was possible. For the men who'd seen it, the shot would live. On in stories, studied on ranges, whispered in training halls. But for Elena Vasquez, it was just another day doing what she'd always done, turning the impossible into reality. And she'd done it without saying much at all, because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why did the quiet after graduation feel more dangerous than the weeks of training before it? The sun had barely risen over Quantico the next morning, and yet the range already felt empty. The laughter, the undercurrent of competition, even the muttered insults that had been a constant background hum, all of it had gone silent. The men who remained after 8 weeks of attrition moved with a different kind of energy now. For most, the course was over. For Elena Vasquez, it felt like something else was just beginning. She walked alone toward the equipment shed, a rifle case bumping against her leg. The M40A6 inside was clean oiled and still smelled faintly of the gunpowder that had marked her impossible shot. She'd slept maybe 3 hours, not because she couldn't sleep, but because she didn't want to. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the target, 2 miles away, and the moment the bullet had arrived, as if her mind was replaying it frame by frame, Morrison was already there when she arrived, leaning against the shed's outer wall. No entourage this time, no smirk. He looked like a man who'd been awake all night, chewing on something too big to swallow. "You meant it?" he asked without preamble. "About teaching me?" Elena set the case down and studied him. There was no arrogance in his posture, no defensive tilt of the chin, just sincerity and something else. Hunger, the kind she'd seen in new recruits who wanted to be better than they were yesterday. "I don't teach quitters," she said simply. "I'm not quitting." She nodded once. "Then we start now." They walked out onto the range together. The wind was lighter than the day before, a lazy breeze that teased the flags instead of snapping them. She didn't tell him to shoot. She told him to listen. "Close your eyes," she said. Morrison looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "What?" "Do it." He did. "What do you feel on your cheek?" "The wind. Too easy." "Which direction?" "Right to left." "How hard?" There was a pause. 15, maybe 20. She shook her head. "It's gusting between 12 and 19. You felt the peak, not the average you aim for. The peak, you miss. You aim for the low. You miss slower. You aim for the rhythm. And the bullet dances with the wind." His eyes opened slowly. "You can tell that just by, you think I had a wind meter in Helmand?" She cut in. "You feel it. You taste it. You watch the leaves, the grass, the mirage in your scope. Everything's talking. Most shooters just don't listen. They spend hours on the basics, reading terrain, watching heat shimmer, understanding that a bullet doesn't just travel forward. It falls. It drifts, it fights, and it loses." She made him fire at shorter distances, adjusting aim not for where the target was, but for where it would be when the round arrived. By the time they were done, Morrison's grouping had tightened by half. He didn't brag, didn't grin, just looked at her like he'd been handed a weapon more powerful than anything he'd ever bought. The rest of the base had started to notice the change. The same operators who had ignored her in the mess hall now shifted in their seats to make space when she walked in. Conversations didn't go silent when she passed. They turned toward her. Delta guys asked about high-angle shots. Rangers wanted tips for spotting concealed threats. Even a few SEALs, the ones who hadn't been part of Morrison's pack, asked quiet questions over coffee. But the respect didn't come without shadows. 3 days after graduation, Captain Chun found her in the armory, cleaning her rifle. "You've made waves," he said. "I noticed. I mean higher than here. Quantico's just a ripple. The brass is talking." She glanced up. "About?" "About the shot and about you." Elena kept working, but her mind sharpened. "Let me guess. They want a PR piece. Female Marine sniper makes impossible shot. Good for recruitment." Chun didn't smile. "That's one version. The other is they want to see if lightning can strike twice, and they want to pick where She set the cleaning rod down. Meaning? Meaning you might get pulled for something outside the usual deployments, and it won't be ceremonial. Her got tightened. Military brass didn't dangle praise without strings. And when they called something special, it usually meant high risk. Low survival. 2 nights later, the call came. Not through the usual chain. Not even through Rodriguez, a restricted number. Voice she didn't recognize. Staff Sergeant Vasquez? Yes, this is Colonel Wexler, Joint Special Operations Command. You'll receive orders by encrypted channel within the hour. Be ready to move in 48. He hung up before she could answer. The orders came through at 0100. She read them twice. Then a third time, no location, no details. Just a deployment code she didn't recognize. And a classified clearance level she'd never been given before. She zipped the M40A6 into its battered case, ran her fingers over the scratches in the stock, the tiny marks that told stories only she remembered when she stepped out into the cold night air. Morrison was waiting by the barracks door. "You're leaving," he said. She nodded. He hesitated. Then, "Bring it back, whatever it is." She gave the smallest of smiles. "If it's a shot, it will find its way home." The next 48 hours blurred into readiness. New uniforms, new comms gear, the kind of kit that didn't go to standard deployments. Morrison didn't follow, but she saw him watching from the range the morning. She boarded the transport. As the helicopter lifted into the night, Quantico disappeared beneath her. She didn't know where she was headed, or what waited there. All she knew was this. Whatever was coming, it wasn't training. And this time, the stakes would be more than a record on a range. What kind of mission didn't even tell you where you were going? Elena had learned long ago that in the military, the less you were told up front, the higher the stakes. The helicopter flight stretched through the night, engines roaring, cold air slicing through the cabin. She sat with her back to the bulkhead, helmet strapped loose, eyes half closed but mind alert. The men around her weren't regular Marines. Their gear was mismatched, unmarked, expensive in a way that spoke of private purchase or classified. Budgets. Their faces gave nothing away. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with the weathered skin of a mountain climber, glanced at her rifle case. "That the one?" Elena didn't bother asking how he knew. "It's the one." He nodded once, a professional acknowledgement, then looked away. Hours later, they landed at a small forward airstrip. The heat hit like a wave, dry, punishing. Nothing like Virginia's humidity. She smelled dust, aviation fuel, and the faint metallic tang of blood somewhere too close. A convoy of unmarked trucks waited inside the briefing tent. A digital map glowed on a table. A voice spoke from the shadows. Tall man, gray hair, posture straight enough to cut glass. "Colonel Wexler, you're here because yesterday one of our deep cover assets went dark," he began. She was tracking a high-value target, codenamed Kestrel, in a region we don't officially operate in. He tapped the map, zooming in on a valley surrounded by jagged ridges. "We believe she's alive, but under surveillance. We also believe Kestrel will attempt to move at first light 2 days from now, if he crosses that border." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Alana studied the terrain on the map. The valley floor was a maze of abandoned villages and dry riverbeds. The ridges offered sightlines, but they were steep, narrow, and exposed. She could see maybe 3 viable sniper positions, all of them requiring difficult approaches. Wexler's eyes met hers. "You hit a record shot 2 miles out at Quantico. That wasn't for bragging rights. It was to see if you could do this." This meant threading a bullet through wind and distance to take out a man surrounded by armed guards, without hitting the asset who might be close enough to touch him. "What's the wind like in that valley?" she asked. "Unstable," he said. "Mountain drafts, shear zones, changes by the minute." Her mind started calculating. "What's the extraction plan for the asset?" "That depends on you." They moved out that night. The approach was the kind of thing that stripped you down to instinct, climbing through rocky gullies in darkness, skirting ridges while the moon hid behind clouds. She carried her rifle in pieces to avoid snagging it, reassembling it only once they were within half a mile of the objective. By dawn, she was belly down behind a narrow shelf of rock. The valley floor spread out below like a living map. Through her scope, she saw them. Kestrel's convoy parked. In the center of the abandoned village, men with rifles slummed casually, their movements betraying boredom. And there, a woman, hands bound, hood over her head, the asset. Alana's pulse slowed. She began her wind reading. The flags here weren't fabric. They were dust trails kicked up by the morning breeze, the way smoke curled from a guard's cigarette, the shimmer in the air above a sun-baked roof. She logged every flicker, every sway. Her radio crackled once, a low voice from the spotter assigned to her. Range, 2478. Target moving in 2 minutes. The margin was tight, too tight. Kestrel emerged from a doorway, speaking to one of his men. He was tall, lean, wearing a dark scarf around his neck. The asset was shoved to her knees less than 2 meters away from him. Elena's finger found the trigger guard. She adjusted 2 clicks for elevation, 1.5 left for wind drift. The wind shifted. She held her breath, waiting for the rhythm to return. The guard started moving the asset toward a waiting vehicle, now or never, her crosshairs locked just above the scarf, aiming for the space between collarbone and jaw, high enough to drop him instantly, low enough to avoid shattering bone into the hostage. The trigger broke. The rifle's report was sharp but clean, swallowed by the mountains through the scope. She saw the scarf snap sideways, saw Kestrel crumple like the air had been sucked out of him. The asset dropped flat, instinct taking over. Guards scrambled in confusion, their eyes scanning rooftops and ridgelines that were too far away to seem possible. The radio was calm. Target down. Asset moving. She didn't stay to watch. The extraction team would handle the rest. She broke down her rifle, sliding each piece back into the case, her hands steady. The climb out was brutal, but she didn't feel it. Her mind was already playing the shot back in her head, not for pride, but for the ledger. Every sniper had one. Not the official kill count, but the private one. The shots that had meant something. This one wasn't about distance or difficulty. It was about not missing when the cost of failure was another human's life. Back at the forward strip, Wexler met her at the truck. "Clean," he said. "One shot? You in for more?" Elena didn't answer immediately. She looked out toward the ridges, the wind curling dust across them like ghost trails. She thought of Morrison back at Quantico, of Rodriguez's voice saying she'd set a new standard, if it's worth the shot. She said finally, "I'm in." Wexler's smile was thin. "Good. We'll be in touch." That night, she lay on a cot in a dim-lit tent, her rifle within arm's reach. Outside, the wind shifted again, rattling the canvas. It carried a sound she knew well, the sound of a place where there would always be another shot worth taking, and she already knew she wouldn't be able to walk away. What did it mean when they brought back someone from your past instead of sending someone new? Elena found out 3 weeks later. She'd been back at Camp Leon for barely a day when the call came. Same restricted number, same clipped voice. "Orders incoming, be ready in 4 hours." She opened the packet in her quarters. At first, nothing surprised her. Location blacked out, target profile vague, time window brutally short. But then she saw the roster. 2 operators, 1 name. Was hers. The other was Morrison. She stared at it, almost hearing the echo of Quantico's range. The insults, the handshake, the request to learn. She hadn't seen him since she left. The meeting point was a dim hangar lit by a single fluorescent tube. Morrison was already there, standing beside a stack of gear. He looked different, leaner, quieter, like someone who'd been burning away layers he didn't need. Vasquez, he said. No smirk, no arrogance, just her name, Morrison. Guess we're stuck with each other. She stepped closer, scanning the kit he'd laid out. It wasn't the custom rifle she'd last seen him with. This one was simpler, a standard Mk13 Mod 7, solid, accurate, without the glint of a price tag meant to impress. You downgraded, she said. He shook his head. Upgraded the part that mattered. The mission brief came from a JSOC officer neither of them recognized. The target, a high-ranking insurgent commander orchestrating attacks across 3 provinces. He'd only be exposed for a narrow window during a planned meeting in a rural compound. The distance from any viable sniper perch to the meeting site. Just under 2,900 meters, Elena's mind went to work. Wind conditions? Unpredictable, the officer said. We've got low-level drone feeds showing cross-shear between the ridges. You'll have to make real-time calls. They were wheels up within the hour, flying low over jagged terrain. Neither spoke much. Until they reached the staging point, a crumbling hilltop ruin with just enough stone walls left to give them cover. Morrison knelt beside her as they laid out their gear. You lead, he said simply. She raised an eyebrow. Thought you didn't take orders from anyone. Quantico changed that. His eyes stayed on the ridgeline. Besides, I want to see how you dance with the wind out here. By mid-morning, they were in position. Through her scope, Elena saw the compound. Mud walls. A central courtyard. Figures moving between shadow and sun. The target hadn't arrived yet. That was both good and dangerous. More time to prepare, but more time for conditions to change. The wind was already restless. It came down from the ridges in sharp gusts, then vanished into sudden lulls, shifting direction like a restless animal. Elena adjusted for it constantly, watching dust swirl in different patterns across the valley floor. Ranges long, Morrison murmured from behind his spotting scope. But we've got clean elevation. She nodded. We'll have one chance, if he's smart. He won't linger in the open. They waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. The sun climbed, burning away the thin morning haze. Sweat slid down Elena's spine under her gear. The wind shifted again. Then, movement. A pair of black SUVs rolled into the courtyard. Men spilled out first, scanning rooftops and ridgelines. Then the target emerged. Even at this distance, she could see his confidence. The easy way he moved. The absence of hurry. He thought he was untouchable here. 2 minutes in the open, maybe less, Morrison said. Her crosshairs found him, then shifted, not to him, but to a point where the wind's rhythm would carry the round into his chest. The gusts came in waves. 3 seconds strong, 2 seconds light, a brief stillness. She timed them, matching her breathing to the pattern. Morrison called adjustments. 1/4 mil right, then half left as the gusts flickered. On your mark, he said. She waited through one cycle, then another. The third was clean. Strong gust, easing, lull. She exhaled and broke the trigger. The rifle's recoil was steady, familiar. The shot arced across nearly 3 kilometers of shifting air, dropping fast toward the courtyard. Impact. The target folded instantly. His bodyguards diving for cover. Panic erupted in the compound. Elena was already breaking down her rifle. Hit, Morrison confirmed, voice tight with adrenaline. Dead center. They moved fast. The exfil route was a narrow goat path down the ridge, loose rock, threatening to send them sliding into open view. Twice, voices echoed too close from the valley floor. Once, a pair of dirt bikes roared past less than 30 meters away, dust choking the air. Only when they reached the extraction point did they breathe. On the flight back, Morrison leaned against the bulkhead, helmet resting on his knee. You ever think about missing? He asked suddenly. Every time, she said. That's why. I don't. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. You know, I think you're the best shot I've ever seen. And not just because of Quantico. She didn't answer. Compliments weren't currency out here. Results were. Back at base, Wexler met them with a nod. Clean work, both of you. He handed each of them a sealed envelope. Stand by for next orders. You're a team now. Morrison grinned faintly. Guess you're stuck with me. Elena slid the envelope into her pocket. We'll see if you can keep up. That night, she lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. She'd never expected to work with him again, much less trust him to watch her back. But trust, like wing calls, wasn't about perfection. It was about reading the conditions and knowing when to take the shot. And something told her the next one wouldn't be as straightforward. What if the last shot you ever took wasn't yours to fire? That thought came to Elena as soon as she read the final set of orders. The packet was thinner than usual, but the details inside carried more weight than any mission she'd taken. She and Morrison weren't being sent to neutralize a target. They were being sent to protect one. The asset this time wasn't an agent in disguise or an officer in deep cover. It was a scientist, doctor. Layla Cowrie, whose research had quietly dismantled a planned insurgent chemical weapons program. She'd agreed to testify in a tribunal, but before she could, someone wanted her silenced. Wexler's voice was blunt during the briefing. She has to make it to the extraction point alive. No exceptions. You will not fire unless it's the only way to keep her breathing. For a sniper, that order felt heavier than a kill mission. Taking a shot was clean, binary. Protecting someone was chaos in motion. The route was brutal. A mountain pass with sheer drops on one side and rock walls on the other. The convoy would move in daylight because speed was their only cover. Elena and Morrison would be positioned a kilometer ahead. Eyes on every ridge, every shadow. They moved into place before dawn. The sky was washed in pale gray. The wind already whispering through the high crags, Elena scanned the valley floor. Through her scope, every shift in light, every ripple in the dust became a possible threat. Morrison was beside her. Spotting scope fixed on the switchbacks below. Convoys rolling, he murmured. The first two trucks appeared, kicking up long plumes of dust. The armored SUV with Cowrie was in the center. A tail vehicle followed. For a few minutes, all was still except for the grind of engines echoing off the rock. Then the wind shifted, not the lazy back and forth she was used to. This was a sharper change. As if the mountains themselves had drawn a breath, Elena adjusted without thinking. But something in the air felt wrong. Movement, a glint flashed from a ridge opposite them. Too bright for rock. Elena's scope locked on it. A barrel protruding from a pile of stones. Another flash, farther down. Two shooters, she said, 180 degrees apart. Targets? Morrison asked. On Cowrie. They didn't have the luxury of perfect angles. The convoy was entering the kill zone. If the shooters opened fire, the SUV's armor would hold for maybe 2 or 3 hits if they didn't aim for the exposed. Windshield. Morrison's voice was low. You take high right. I'll take low left. The wind shifted again. Elena didn't fight it. She timed it. Her crosshairs locked on the shooter's shoulder. The man was focused on the convoy. Scope glint betraying his intent. She breathed out, squeezed. The crack of her shot rolled off the cliffs. The shooter spun, rifle tumbling away. Morrison's round came half a second later. The second sniper slumped forward, his weapon clattering. Onto the rocks. The convoy didn't stop. That was the point. Protect the package. Keep moving. Elena and Morrison broke down their rifles fast, slinging them as they moved along the ridgeline to maintain overwatch. But the fight wasn't done. Half a kilometer later, 3 dirt bikes appeared from a side trail, engines howling as they closed. On the rear vehicle, Morrison shifted to cover them, dropping one rider with a clean shot to the engine block. The bike skidded sideways, throwing the man into the dirt. The others peeled off, disappearing into the rocks. By the time the convoy reached the extraction point, a flat patch of high ground where a helicopter's rotor wash was already kicking up dust. Alana's throat was dry, her pulse steady but elevated. Cowrie was rushed aboard without ceremony. The helicopter lifted, banking hard toward friendly airspace. Elena and Morrison stood in the dust cloud, rifles slung, watching it go. He broke the silence first. That was different. Protection's harder, she said. He nodded. Feels heavier. Wexler met them back at the staging site. His expression didn't change much, but his words carried weight. You kept her alive. That's all that matters. He paused. You're both off the roster for now. Debrief. Rest. But you may get the call again. That night, in the quiet of her bunk, Elena replayed the mission. Not the shots fired, but the ones she didn't. The moments when patience had been the only weapon worth using. Morrison stopped by before lights out. He leaned in the doorway, his face half in shadow. You ever think about what happens when the calls stop coming? She looked at him for a long moment. Yeah, and I think that's when it'll get dangerous. Because we'll start wondering if we still matter. He gave a faint, tired smile. We'll matter. When he left, she sat in the dim light, the wind outside rattling the thin metal walls. She thought about the 2-mile shot at Quantico, about the valley in the mountains, about Cowrie's wide eyes when she stepped off that SUV alive. She thought about Morrison, once an enemy in everything but uniform, now the man she trusted to. Take the shot she couldn't, and she realized something she hadn't before. Being the best shot wasn't about distance or the rifle or even the wind. It was about knowing which shots mattered enough to take and which ones mattered more. Not to. In the end, she knew the legends wouldn't remember her name, but somewhere a scientist would testify. A convoy would make it through a pass, and a target would never cross a border. And that was enough. Sometimes. Dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.